All right, guys, today I'm going to be going over Unit 7 or part of Unit 7, which is the cities and urban land use section. And so we're going to be discussing parts of urbanization and then some issues that urbanization has, cities and urban issues. So first of all, I wanted to show you this really cool GIF that I found that shows Shanghai over the course of about 30 years, a little over 30 years. From 1987, which, gosh, if you can believe it, I was a sophomore in high school, all the way up to 2013. And you could see the difference here. And if I were to try and say, hey, what's the main idea of this particular GIF? What I would say is this is the impact of globalization. And nowhere can you see this more definitively than in some place like Shanghai, which is just totally due to massive foreign investment and trade with China. So here are two images of Houston in the 1950s and then Houston in the 2000s. And I couldn't find a date for this particular photograph. And of course, those of you that live in Houston, you know that this is only about half of the cities. Houston has actually several areas that we don't necessarily consider them downtown, but this is the CBD downtown proper of Houston. And then, of course, there's a whole other area by the Galleria, which has just as many high rises, maybe some more high rises than this. So, but once again, you could see just the incredible transformation over the course of 50 years. I know 50 years sounds like an awful lot, but really over the course of civilizations, it's just a blink of an eye. So today we're going to be discussing several different issues. The first, I just want to discuss basic vocab. Site and situation are terms that you learned back in Unit 1, and here they are again back in Unit 7. Site, if you recall, this is the physical characteristics of a place. So it could be like, of course, I'm in Houston. So Houston is an area that's incredibly humid and it's flat. It's not mountainous at all. It's almost coastal. We're close enough to the coast where we can consider ourselves coastal. It definitely impacts our environment and our weather here. So when you're looking at where cities were founded, the earliest cities are going to be in locations that are great for trade and also for defense. You're going to want a location that's easy to defend. So, for instance, peninsulas could be great for this. Islands, of course, are super easy because you have your basic defense already built into the physical geography. Hills are really, really good for this. You can see the hills in you can see that Houston has hills is what I was looking at, but you can also see the hills in these images that I grabbed here. And of course, when you're at the top of a hill, you can look it down and see the invading armies coming in. So it's a kind of an early alert for you. So that's some of our earliest characteristics. Also, don't forget about the importance of water. You should have learned this a very, very long time ago. Water is, of course, essential for life, but moving forward to the modern era, you have to have access to fresh water or any type of water source for manufacturing, for agricultural production. And it's actually a really great measure of development to look at a country to see how they are able to extract water from the ground for people in their cities or in their particular regions. Also, let's not forget with regards to site factors, the impact of transportation. And of course, this is once again connected to water. Remember, it's fast. It's much, much cheaper to ship something via water than it is to ship via rail or air or anything else. One little blurb I want to go ahead and go over with you with regards to vocab is this concept of fall line. I honestly haven't seen this in anything APHD related in a while, but I want to make sure that you guys know what the fall line is. This is along the United States, and you could see in that top image there all of the main cities that are located in the fall line. This is just physical geography impacting where cities are located. The fall line is, I don't say literally, but it's actually a place where you see, kind of think of like waterfalls, right? Where you begin to see this shift in physical geography, in the geology of the region, where you see this change in elevation. And so you tended to see cities that were along the fall line, first of all, because you can get the energy source from the water falling, but also just because it's really, really hard to transport. I mean, if you can see the waterfall in that little bottom picture there, it's hard to send a ship up that where that split is in the waterfall line. Okay, so those are all site factors. Now let's go ahead and look at situation factors. Situation factors have to do with the relationship between two regions. So site factors are what's the physical geography of a place. Situation factors have to do with the relationship between two places. So, for instance, once again, I'm in Houston, and we know that Houston is the energy capital of the world, and part of that is due to the discovery of and the use of oil very, very early. Spindletop, you may have heard the story of Spindletop, but also, especially recently, we are adjacent to major oil fields in the Gulf of Mexico. You look at a city like Mumbai, India, big manufacturing hub, and of course, those are very close by to the cotton fields that are outside of Mumbai. Birmingham, England, if you recall our discussion of industrialization, that's very, very close by those coal deposits. So once again, situation has a lot to do with the success of a city. Think about some place like Singapore. The situation of Singapore is fantastic for trade because it's halfway between China and India, and all that transit that just kind of passes in between those two regions has to stop in Singapore. Situation can change over time, and I went ahead and I grabbed an image of Lake Mead. You could see the impact of the drought on Lake Mead in the United States. So with regards to resources, maybe let's say you're looking at a place like Bolivia and you're trying to get, lithium in a place like Bolivia. And then let's say you find another location of lithium here in the United States. Well, maybe you won't be trading as much with Bolivia anymore if you find lithium here in the US. So just realize that situation, the impact of cities and situation can change over time. Things like drought, things like wars, transportation pattern changes. Let's think about the South China Sea and China's continued island building in the South China Sea, how that might affect global transit patterns later on down the road. So really good examples of situation changing over time. Okay, now to change modes completely here, we're going to talk about John Borchert's Epochs of urban growth. And so as I'm going through this, I'm going to suggest that you draw something to demonstrate knowledge of these items. So this particular section has to do with how transportation methods and increases in technology have changed how American cities grow over time. And so we're going to go through these one section at a time. The first one is called the Sail Wagon Epoch. And of course, look at those dates there from 1790 to 1830. We're not talking about super high tech here. And so cities, as they're structured, are going to have to deal with the technology that they use for transportation. So we're talking about ships here, right? And of course, wagons. So if I were you, I'd probably stop this for just a second and draw maybe a little boat or a wagon or something to kind of cement in your brain this particular epoch. So this is going to focus on the cities in the Northeast of the United States, those coastal cities. And think of colonization and those cities that you studied in colonization. These are going to be all cities that are oriented towards Europe because that's where trade was happening at the time. So think about cities like Boston and New York and Philadelphia. These are cities, and of course that term hinterland, remember the hinterland is the surrounding area outside of a city. The next epoch is what we call the Iron Horse epoch. And if you were thinking, what's an iron horse? That would be something like a train, right? And so this is the very beginnings of the rail network that we had in the United States. And of course, don't forget your U.S. history. Who urbanized first? The North urbanized first, of course. And they did that because they had the natural resources, the site factors there to be able to urbanize and to create those inventions and utilize those inventions like a rail network. So we're talking about cities in the Northeast, but also moving a bit further west. Think about the Rust Belt area now. These are going to be cities like Chicago and Detroit, cities along the Ohio River Valley, all cities that were really got the benefit of modern industrialization. Okay, the next one is going to be the steel rail epic, and this runs from 1870 to 1920. I probably would try and draw a railroad if I could here, some kind of train here. But this is really showing the profusion, the spread of the rail network. And of course, once again, notice this is further north here, right? And think about those cities during this particular time. Think about cities like Detroit and Chicago, really booming cities, and then of course moving a little bit further south from that, but still kind of staying in the Northeast and moving towards the Midwest, where we definitely haven't gone anywhere below the Mason-Dixon line yet. That will be soon. But these are going to be cities that are part of that steel rail epic. The next epic will be the auto air amenity epic, and this runs from the 1920s to the 1970s. And of course, at this point in time, your technology changes are pretty substantial now. So we start with automobiles in the early 1920s, and then we push through to the 1970s. And this begins to show how cities during this time were really impacted by the growth of the automobile. So you begin to see throughout the United States this really complex network of transportation. So think about, if you've seen the movie Cars, think about the impact of Route 66 that the interstate highway system had on Route 66. So cities that were formed along that during the time, and then how they shifted and changed with the interstate highway system that was created. Also, with these improved amenities and speed of people transporting themselves and goods and products, you also had increased suburban development. So think about a city like Los Angeles, or think about a city like Houston. Once again, these are cities that grew up after the advent of the automobile. And that's why these cities are so spread out. Houston is the size of Rhode Island. And the reason why is because this city was pretty much came to fruition, even though Houston has been around for a while. Modern Houston came about really in the 1940s and 1950s. Also, this term Sun Belt, remember, so the Rust Belt is the area that runs from the Northeast all the way kind of through to and through Pennsylvania, Ohio, really all the way over into Illinois. The Sun Belt region runs from the Georgia, kind of along Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, all the way through over to California. And these are all going to be regions where your cities that were, again, I want to say growing up, but being formed during this time, these are cities that came about after the advent of the automobile. One other thing to consider about the Sun Belt migration is, and I don't really have it on here, a bullet point for it, was the impact of air conditioning. Those of you that live in the South, you know that summertime is miserable here. And the only thing that makes it okay is the fact that you know that you can run from your car, which is air conditioned, to the inside of your house or apartment, which is air conditioned, to the grocery store, which is air conditioned. And that makes life livable down here. Our schools are designed not to increase airflow. Our schools are actually designed really tight, meaning they're trying to prevent airflow out because you have air conditioning to keep everybody cool. So most cities in the South, and this actually includes over in the West as well, these large cities, they're large now because of the advent of air conditioning, in addition to the advent of the automobile. The last one that we have here is what we call the satellite jet propulsion electronic epic. And the bottom line for this particular epic is that modern transportation methods led to increased change and growth of American cities. So increased suburbanization. And of course, now that we have the high-tech forms of communication like the internet, really, and of course, like what we're seeing now with people that are forced to be home right now, many of us can do our jobs remotely because of the technology that we now have.